This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth, for competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty, for the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. A lot of things happening this week, both by Freedom Watch and outside of Freedom Watch. Of course, just last Thursday, Hunter Biden was indicted. That's a sham. As I say with Woody Allen, a mockery of a travesty of two mockeries of a sham of a travesty. He was re-indicted by that same compromised and corrupt U.S. attorney in the District of Delaware, this guy David Weiss, no Miami Weiss, so to speak, or Vice. He's a clown. He's a political tool of the Bidens, and this is simply to relieve pressure with regard to indicting Hunter Biden on the charges of bribery from communist China, Ukraine, Russia, and Romania, which is not going to happen anyway. And frankly, it would never even happen in a Republican administration because they have an unwritten rule. They don't go after the higher-ups in either political party. Instead, he was indicted just for the gun violation. It will go back in front of the same judge, so it'll be interesting to see how she deals with it. But don't be surprised if Hunter Biden walks. He gets no prison time. Talk about walking. He's walking all over California right now. He lives in Malibu, paying $15,000 a month to rent his house with his wife. Where does the $15,000 come from? Most likely the illegal money that he obtained, now over $20 million in counting, from these various countries, selling the influence of his father as vice president, and probably even after that as president. The whole thing hasn't been uncovered yet. But the clowns on Capitol Hill, the Republican clowns, the Keystone Cops, as I call them, the chickens without their heads on, run around saying they're going to do an impeachment inquiry. Well, we're already far beyond an inquiry. There should be an impeachment. They're simply trying to play a game. They want to weaken Biden up to the 2024 elections, thinking that won't get him elected. But there needs to be justice. There needs to be the rule of law. The Republicans play games, and then when they're reelected, having asked for a lot of money to get reelected, they do nothing again, and then they'll ask for more money to be reelected. Anybody who gives money to the Republican Party is throwing their money, frankly, away. It's worthless. You might as well throw it in the trash, because this party does not represent the American people, much less conservatives, people of faith, and libertarians. If they did, we wouldn't have a Joe Biden. We wouldn't have total leftist control over our country. People would see that they had principles, that they did what they said they were going to do, that they would balance the budget and lower inflation, that they would reform Obamacare, that they would give us clarion calls on legitimate wars rather than sending us into wars, frankly, that just cost the lives of our brave servicemen and huge amounts of money. The American people are wise to both political parties, but they're also lazy and asleep at the switch. Not our supporters, not the supporters of Radio America, this station, but others. And they will vote for someone who they think looks the best, or who talks the best, or who, for whatever reason, satisfies their desire for this or that, gives them a false promise like student loans being forgiven or whatever. But we are at a point, a crossroads, where we can't do that, where we have to elect people. And I would submit that the elections in 2024 are a fruitless exercise. We need to declare a new government and not a new nation and set up a whole new system, because you can bet that 2024 will be just as fraudulent as 2020. You have to join Freedom Watch's Justice League for any reality. You know, we have our Third Continental Congress, where our delegates have debated declaring independence. That will most likely occur in the next few months. Again, not a new nation, but a new government of honest and ethical leaders, and making some fine tuning to our Constitution, like taking immunity away from federal government officials and judges and making them held accountable. And talk about accountability. It's your Freedom Watch that actually causes the accountability. We have, of course, our convictions of Joe Biden for the bribery and for negligent homicide in Afghanistan. We will be issuing next week a call to law enforcement to arrest Joe Biden, to put him in prison where the sun don't shine anymore. The same for James Biden and, of course, Hunter Biden. We, the American people, have the right to enforce the rule of law ourselves, and we will be issuing through the citizens judge, we believe we will get a conviction of Anthony Fauci, an individual who sent the SARS seeds of COVID to a communist Chinese lab in Wuhan, China, knowing that they were going to do gain of function research, which is largely illegal in this country. And in fact, convincing then President Obama and Vice President Biden to grant $3 million approximately to that lab to do that research. And what was it for? To create a bioweapon. And why has it all been covered up? Why does the United States government not have any answers? Because they don't want to have any answers. Because the seeds of COVID were developed in our lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland. We do experiments as well on viruses, dangerous viruses. We create bioweapons as well, even though it's illegal under international law. And the reality is, and I have a client, Judy Mikovits, that will attest to this, and others know it as well, is that Fauci sent the seeds of COVID-19 to do research at the Wuhan lab because it cannot be done here, and then lied about it to Senator Rand Paul in front of Congress. And there's another issue. Rand Paul has sent a criminal referral to the Biden Justice Department, the Gestapo of the Biden Justice Department. Don't expect anything to happen there. Obviously not. Fauci's in the hip pocket of the leftist Democrats. In fact, now he's out recommending that we're probably going to have to wear masks again. There's more vaccinations on the horizon. And that's a whole other issue. These vaccinations were dangerous. We now know that. And if you have been injured by a vaccine, please contact me at leclayman@gmail.com. There is recourse to get compensation for you. This is something that must be done for the rule of law. But Fauci must be held accountable. His actions have now resulted in the death of over 6 million people, closer to 10 million, more than Hitler killed in the Holocaust in World War II. This must be held to account. And let me say something else in this interview. And I say this to President Trump because I've been trying to communicate to him directly for years. Whatever reason, people in and around Donald Trump have not allowed letters or whatever to get through. I did see him once at a golf tournament at Bedminster last year. I spoke with him briefly. I said, I'm here to help you, but he needs help. He hires the absolute worst lawyers. And the last gambit, this thing, I would just call it a thing, his indictment for January 6th in the District of Columbia, where he will surely be convicted by a hanging jury with a dishonest, corrupt judge named Tanya Chutkan. His lawyers waited several weeks to file a motion to disqualify her. She made a statement to another peaceful protester that the reason he's going to jail is because one man incited you to violence and he's now out on the loose, and inferred that he's not in prison. That's enough to disqualify her, showing prejudgment. But what did Trump's lawyers do? Excuse the French. They messed around, you know what word I'm going to use, for several weeks and didn't file it. If they had filed it sooner, and frankly, I read it, it's weak even as it is, it could be much stronger, that would have stopped Tanya Chutkan in her tracks and probably held her from setting Trump's trial for March 4th of 2024, one day before Super Tuesday. Probably she will deny the motion. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, equally as corrupt as the judges on the district court, the lower court, will uphold the denial. It'll go to the Supreme Court. And then who will it go to? Chief Justice John Roberts, who's two-faced, a man who lives in the closet intellectually and otherwise. He's not really a conservative, and he will probably not remove her as well from the court. So this is typical of Trump. He hires people that he sees on Fox News, or he hires other people that he finds God knows where. And those that he does hire that are any good wind up getting indicted themselves, and wind up with bar complaints by the District of Columbia Bar in particular, because that bar is toxic. It's trying to remove all conservative and Republican lawyers, so we cannot bring actions in court and leave us no option but to wage a revolution. We're trying to do it peacefully and legally at Freedom Watch, but there will be those out there who probably resort to extreme violence and bloodshed, because that's where we're headed as a country. Make no mistake about it. When food prices are that high, when gas prices are now approaching $6 in states and $7, $8, $9 in California, when rampant crime is going through our streets, when immigration is out of control, illegal immigration that is, and people are running across the border that are drug traffickers, human traffickers, and sex traffickers. Fentanyl is killing our kids coming across the border, and our military is demoralized, and perverted ideologies and lifestyles are being pushed on our kids behind our backs in schools. We're in a revolutionary mode. Again, make no mistake about it. I'm going to be back with the next segment of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Listen carefully, because the time is now if you care about your kids and grandkids and future generations. You just can't sit there watching Fox News or reading books, even my own book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America. Read that and join us and act and make tax-deductible contributions, because we are your Justice Department. The only other Justice Department is a Gestapo run by the Bidens and the left. We need your help. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. God bless you. God bless your family. And watch what I say, and especially watch what I do on your behalf at Freedom Watch, because time is for action, not for words anymore. I'll be right back. Stay tuned. I'm back with a true American hero, a client, a friend, someone who sticks his neck out for what he believes in is right. His name is Ammon Bundy. He's part of the Bundy family. I consider myself, and I hope they do as well, an honorary member. But they are a truly great family, and of course they went through trials and tribulations. That's the least of it with regard to the siege on Bunkerville many years ago. You'll remember that. And Ammon's been fighting ever since. He's dealing with some important issues today that deal with children. But I want to bring you Ammon Bundy. I'm very privileged and honored to have him on our show. And Ammon, just recap for us, what happened at Bunkerville, what led up to that, how you essentially did 2 years in prison with your dad, with your brother Ryan, and Davey and Mel, and the injustice there. And of course, it continues on. We see that you were just the beginning. We see what went on with January 6th and the peaceful protesters. Many of them are doing 20 plus years and never committed any violent act. And then we'll get into what's been happening with your children in Idaho, your friends' children. So let her rip.
Well, just kind of give a recap to everybody listening. In 2014, basically an army of 213 armed federal agents from 5 different agencies: the Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, and then of course we found out later that the FBI was involved in it, and that it was being orchestrated very much with the Attorney General's office in Washington, D.C. and Nevada. And so that was what ultimately happened in 2014. What led up to that was my family had been ranching in that area for, good almost 150 years now. So at the time it was about 140 years. And they wanted to make a mitigation area out of it for the desert tortoise. And my dad had a problem with that. He had rights, there deeded rights with the state of Nevada, and he had an issue with those rights being taken away. And so he went through, a couple of different proceedings with the federal courts, and ultimately did not prevail there, but he understood his rights very clearly, and so he just went to ranching. And almost 20 years he went to ranching, and then during the Obama administration, they come to remove him, to trespass him from ranching on our ranch that we had been again, ranching on for over 140 years, since 1877, now 5 generations. And ultimately what happened is they locked the land up, put snipers on the hill, began abusing people, throwing, like tasing people and body slamming people to the asphalt. They were killing the cattle by air with helicopters and burying them in mass graves. And ultimately, people caught wind of it, and there was video of it. And people from all over the country came to the ranch and basically gave the federal agents, an ultimatum. And the federal agents decided to leave, and we went back to ranching. And then, of course, they tried to indict us, and I guess a Nevada, grand jury would not indict us. And then a very similar thing was happening to the Hammond family up in Oregon. So I went up there, and others went up there to give them a hand and to bring a lot of attention to that. And we did do that. We brought international attention to what was happening to them. And ultimately, we garnered a pardon for the Hammond family. But it cost us, they arrested us, charged us with charges in Oregon, serious charges in Oregon and serious charges in Nevada. We went through a trial in Oregon, and believe it or not, even in Portland, Oregon, we were found not guilty on all charges. And then in Nevada, through a series of exposing and the corruption, we end up with the case dismissed down there.
Very well orchestrated, your defense. We'll be right back. We're going to continue a little more with this and move on to some other subjects. Thank you, Ammon.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. We're back with Ammon Bundy. He described what happened, and he did it in a very matter-of-fact way, but it was actually worse than he describes it. He's being very modest right now. And by the way, he defended himself in Oregon, pro se, and won that along with his brother, Ryan. I sat in on the trial in Las Vegas. I gave advice to the Bundy family. I visited Cliven over 30 times at federal prison in Pahrump. I saw what went on. It was a corrupt judge. A whistleblower came forward that said there was a kill list from BLM, whistleblower on the heads of the Bundys. Many things happened, and eventually the case was dismissed by this judge, who was an Obama appointee, personally recommended by the corrupt Senator Harry Reid, but she had to do it basically to save her own skin. And believe it or not, it was a Trump attorney general who allowed appeal to be taken to the Ninth Circuit. We ultimately prevailed. But it tells you something about this government. It doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. The American people have to fight for their own rights, and Ammon has done that very, very effectively. However, Ammon, as you may know, and I talked to your dad, Cliven, yesterday, I was called by a reporter of Politico. There is a new case that was brought against BLM trying to force yet another raid on your ranch and obtaining the cattle, taking the cattle, claiming that somehow the desert tortoise is at risk. And of course, we know the desert tortoise actually lives off of the cattle. It eats the manure. And your family ranches on 400,000 of the most beautiful acres you'll ever see on Lake Mead with 400 head. How can they be hurting the desert tortoise? And last but not least, there are euthanizing farms in Nevada because there are too many desert tortoises. So this is all a sham. And, we'll have to keep our guard up for these radical environmentalists that are trying to destroy ranchers in the West. But I want to turn now to January 6th, talk a little bit about that briefly, on your perception of how that relates to what happened to you. And then let's get into this very sad story about Department of Children and Families in Nevada and St. Luke's.
Well, I'll just say that prior to January 6th, in that August of 2020, we had a very similar thing that happened in Idaho. Now, the governor here, Governor Little, was trying to pass an immunity bill that would have protected the Idaho government and all the large institutions, such as St. Luke's, from any lawsuit relating to COVID. So, they could kill people in the hospital, whatever else they were doing there. Malpractice, whatever, or lockdowns, suicides, all of those things could kill people or harm people, and they were trying to make it so that they were immune to any lawsuits that were related to COVID. And so several hundred of us went to the Capitol building like normal, even though it was a special legislative session. And we went to go into the House gallery, and they locked the doors. Well, we knew the law. The law is very clear in Idaho, and I don't know how it is on a federal level, but the Capitol building is supposed to be the people's house. And the law, Idaho law, says that the House and Senate galleries shall be open to the public during all special and legislative sessions, which makes sense, right? So they can't do business behind doors, closed doors. Well, anyhow, so we ended up pushing our way in. We pushed right past the Idaho State Police, pushed right in, filled the gallery, and we were peaceful, and they were very upset about it. And the next day, because they blamed me for leading it, they arrested me. And I went through a trial where they trespassed me for being in the Capitol building. Now, the reason I say that is because then 6 months later, we have the January 6th incident. And so I have a really, firsthand opinion about what happened. And I think we have to remember, first of all, that our Capitol buildings do not belong to the government. They belong to the people. And the representatives that we send to do the business in the Capitol are the people's representative. And then when they want to close the doors and lock the doors and then have bureaucrats stop the people from coming in, well, there's a problem with that. There's a huge fundamental problem with that, period. Because the House doesn't belong to the bureaucrats. It's supposed to belong to the people. And when there's any business being done in the people's house, it should be done in front of the people. But they use this excuse as COVID to continue to do business in the Capitol building, but lock the people out. So that's, in my opinion, problem number one and the main problem. So you can argue that, people broke in and all those other things, but the number one issue that I find that is very rarely talked about is the people's rights to enter that building under any condition. Whenever there's business being done, the people have a right and a duty to go in there and to make sure that that is being done in an open and correct way. And they were trying to stop that. Secondly, Larry, if people broke in, or if people damaged something, or they broke in and they were unauthorized, then charge them for trespassing or vandalism or damage. This idea that they were insurrectionists is just absolutely absurd. It is literally just a political witch hunt. That's all it is, because it was one type of political view that was trying to get into the Capitol building, and those in power right now, including the FBI, of course, the Biden administration, are all directly opposed to this political force. And so they're using the force of law, the compulsion of the state, to destroy their political enemies. And it's just that simple.
Yeah, it really is. And I represent some of the January 6th peaceful protesters. We have 2 class actions. We're fighting in the courts, but the judges are in the hip pockets generally of the establishment, because they were put on the bench by the establishment. And they're no different than the judges of King George III that rubber stamped his edicts. And you've gone through that on many occasions, including recently. So let's shift to what
Larry,
happened.
I have a question for you. I think it's maybe enough for public. They are Washington, D.C. residents that are on the jury? Or is it a district? Like, is there Virginia? I mean, I'm just curious about that,
No,
because
it's Washington, D.C. and Trump will be tried, and he's of course the lead defendant of all the January 6th defendants in many ways. he will be tried by a hanging jury. I mean, it's stacked. And then the judge, Tanya Chutkan, is compromised and corrupt. And frankly, she's a reverse racist, so she'll undoubtedly hate Trump as well. She's doing whatever she can to cook that trial, and she has a conflict of interest. I mean, I want to get to the other issue, but to be brief, as I said in the opening, she said to a peaceful protester, "You're going to go to prison because one man incited you to violence, and that man is on the loose," and that was Donald Trump, and she's now sitting over that trial. So there's a motion to disqualify her. I'm certain she'll never grant it, and neither will the appellate court, which is equally as compromised as corrupt as the lower court in the District of Columbia. This is the most vile place in the United States. If you think Las Vegas, Nevada is bad, I mean, that's a warm-up act compared to Washington, D.C., and even Boise.
That's what I was concerned about.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring it out that, I mean, the reason why these January 6 people, are being found guilty is because of the jury. They are a bureaucratic pool of jurors, and ultimately boil down to 12 people that basically work for the government or receive such from the government, because that's the majority of those that live in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's worse than that. But it's nothing to laugh about. You have to laugh or you cry. But let's get into what happened recently with the Department of Children and Families, and we'll go into the last segment of that as well, of this show, because I want you to lay it out, because I had a similar circumstance years ago representing a family in Jacksonville where a very religious family, I'll give a little preview here, was locked out of their own house and their child taken by Children and Families when he wanted to spend his last days with his parents praying to God. And DCF took him, and he died in the arms of the DCF agent. He had blood cancer, and he felt that all he needed to stem the pain was not morphine, as some doctor was trying to push on him, but God, just the prayer with his family. He wanted to be with his family rather than drug-like, lion in lion country safari, in his last days. But go ahead and tell your story, because it's a terrible story, and you're fighting a big fight there. You've been held unjustly to account for what went on for the alleged illegal acts of others.
Well, I ran for governor in this last election and was gaining a lot of support, a lot of just a lot of momentum. And then right in the middle of it, I get a call from my marketing advisor for my campaign's daughter. And she's frantic. I mean, she is almost in a panic. And her car is surrounded by Meridian police officers, and they're threatening to take away her baby. And she's terrified. She's calling me for help. And ultimately, they did take the baby, and it was just completely on false pretense. These are extremely loving and caring parents. And of course, it was CPS that was doing the taking, and Meridian Police doing the taking under the direction of CPS. And
Child Protective Services. It's like DCF.
CPS, Child Protective Service, in Idaho. And they took this baby, and the problem with what was happening is the baby was having a hard time processing solid foods, but the baby was fine on breast milk. And so they took the baby away from the mother, and then they arrested the mother, actually, because she wouldn't give the baby to him. So they charged her with obstruction of justice and booked her in Ada County Jail. And then they put the baby in St. Luke's Hospital, and the baby continued to decline because he wasn't getting his mother's breast milk. And they tried to put IVs in him and nasal feeding tubes and bottles, and all those things he would throw up because he had an allergy to proteins. And they had what they end up diagnosing, not St. Luke's, afterwards they end up diagnosing it to cyclic vomiting syndrome. And but he was fine and stable on his mother's breast milk. And so I got involved immediately, went to the hospital, demanded they give the baby back. They arrested me, booked me in Ada County Jail that night, got out the next morning, rallied hundreds of people, and we kept tons of pressure on the judge, on the CPS agents, Meridian Police, and at the hospital presence, just following the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to grieve government for redress. And we did that. We did it very effectively. We've learned how to do it very effectively, and we got this baby back within 6 days, which was amazing because the judge had just ordered that the baby was going to remain in state custody for another month. But because of the pressure we were putting on the right people, they backed away from that order and ended up giving the baby back.
We have about 30 seconds in this segment. We'll pick it up on the end of the break.
Okay.
Listen carefully what Ammon has to say, because this is the verdict. You can see the heavy-handedness of government, how the people's rights are basically secondary to a great, to use the words of Iran, Satan, that could care less about the interests of you and me. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Ammon will be able to finish this story off. Thank you. We're back, fellow patriots, people of faith, those who believe in the vision and creation of our founding fathers. This is the verdict. Listen to Ammon Bundy. Listen to what he's going through in Idaho. Again, he ran for governor. Okay, and when he steps out of line, according to the establishment, what do? They arrest him, or they sue him for defamation. So tell the rest of the story, Ammon. We have about 5 minutes to go.
Okay, so I'll make a pretty long story quick, but they ultimately dropped the case against the mother of the family because it was completely bogus. And then they dropped the charges against the mother and the aunt, because they arrested the aunt too for obstruction of justice. However, shortly after they dropped the case, dismissed the case, they sued myself and Diego, my campaign marketing advisor, who was the grandfather. They sued us for defamation because we fully exposed what was happening and put a ton of pressure on them. Now, I want to just bring to light what is really, really happening, because there is an extremely powerful, political organization here in Idaho. It's called IACI. It's like Idaho Commerce Industry Association, or Association Industry. And St. Luke's Hospital is part of it. The governor was the previous board of directors. The chief of staff, the governor's chief of staff, was the previous board of directors. And it's all tied together. Their attorneys are Holland and Hart, which is the attorney that is coming after us under, clients of St. Luke's. And so what is happening here is it's not just this hospital saying we defamed them, that it's actually the Idaho establishment. And I think we terrified them, pulling in 20% as an independent candidate for the very first time of running. And then we just keep exposing what they're doing here in Idaho. It's very similar to a national level, and they're all claiming that they're conservative, but they're not. So now the courts, through the corruption here in Idaho, have somehow got a $52 million judgment against Diego, the grandfather, and I for only speaking the truth. And I continue to speak the truth and give videos and make videos and so forth of the very facts, like using the medical records and the very facts of the case. And they say that by doing that, I'm in violation of a protective order that they put on the plaintiffs, or over the plaintiffs. And now they're trying to put me in jail for contempt of court. Up to 6 months is what they're after. And so that's kind of where we're at.
Well, keep fighting, Ammon. Where can they go to see your videos? Where is your website?
Well, they can go to my YouTube channel, Ammon Bundy. They can also go to peoplesrights.org. And then freedomman.org is a really good place too. That's Diego's website. And YouTube, you know, I just lay it out. I'm not a professional videographer or anything, but it's pretty clear, and it's damning to St. Luke's and to the Idaho establishment, because they took a baby wrongfully, and I believe it was ultimately for political purposes.
Well, this is very important because our kids are being abused these days. Quite apart from what you've alleged here, Alan, is the fact that, you know, we've got perverted ideology being pushed on kids in schools. Parents have no say in it. Sex change operations, everything else. Our kids are our future. And that's one reason why we do what we do at Freedom Watch, because it's not just a question of the tyranny that we face today from our government. Our founding fathers were in a far less worse situation than we are today. King
Yes.
George III was a saint compared to the people that are running our country today. And if we don't stand up, and if they're not people like Ammon Bundy who are fearless, and his entire family who's fearless, whether it's Cliven, whether it's your mom, whether it's Ryan, Mel, or Davey, then this country's gone. It is absolutely gone. So, you know, I obviously, you know, not to be too sentimental, but I fell in love with your family because this is America. You are America. Our founding fathers stood up. The king declared war on us. We didn't declare war on him. You had war declared on you for simply going about your life. So I want to thank you for everything you do. We'll bring you back to talk more about what's been going on. But thank you, and God bless you, Evan.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it. Thank you.